Welcome back, everyone. We are at the grand finale of the Heroes of Legend DLC proposal series, and whoo boy has it been a ride. Traveling across the various nations and realms of the old world, followed by a horrible collection of mishaps that vaguely got us across the continents of the New World, all of which of course led up to our current location on this derelict vessel. Now, when the skeletal authorities of Xantri told me there was a magical ship in their port offering not only to take us home, but to also pick up all of the various commenters we've lost along the way, I thought it was too good to be true. Now, I do have good news and bad news. The good news is that our captain was indeed able to fulfill this request, and everyone we've lost along the journey is now back on board. Bad news is that they unfortunately were resurrected as zombies and spirits, and we may or may not have willingly joined up with a Vampire Coast crew for a bit. Still, all in all, I would consider that a net positive. Just those of you commenters who are still among the living, please be sure to sit in a group and slap the wandering hands of any suspiciously long-fanged individuals that get too close. Anyway, there is still one character standing between us and the end of this little series. That, of course, is a representative to sail the high seas, alongside the rotting dead found under the flags of the Vampire Coast. I won't lie, of all the races covered in this proposal set, I had quite the hard time digging up an acceptable undead captain. Of course, I could have turned to the remaining captains who sailed either under or against Count Noctilus in the Dreadfleet story, but that just didn't satisfy me. The only captain from there I thought was a really good fit was Vangeist, but with him already represented by a spell, I felt I could do better. I also felt like he'd kinda steal the thunder of the damned paladins, who already have the role of an ethereal melee hero covered. So, I wandered far and wide searching for someone worthy of being a genuinely new captain that might bring some interesting flair to the fleet they join. It would be upon the haunted ship named the Uternimung that I would find one such individual. I would like to introduce you all to Captain Nosh. Decades ago, there was a brave Empire vessel named the Uternimung that ran under a level-headed and kind Captain Schluter. One day, when he was taking on goods for a trading voyage from a city along the River Reich, the captain was approached by two men from the River Strigani people, who desired to join his crew. Now, most captains would outright refuse such an offer, if not have the poor nomads beaten for even asking, as it was considered terribly bad luck to bring one of the gypsy people on board. Schluter didn't believe in such ridiculous rumors, however, finding sailors who believed in the superstitious to be cowardly saps. So he allowed the Strigani to join his crew, and the Uternimung set sail down the river towards the sea. The captain's ridicule towards the belief that the Strigani being in league with dark powers proved wise at first, as the two men were incredibly hard workers and knew their way around a boat better than any sailor he'd ever seen. Then the food spoiled. Somehow, every last morsel on the vessel had rotten, and the Uternimung was weeks out from land. The crew started to get hungry, and angry words began to be exchanged in private. Finally, a mutiny was launched against Captain Schluter, led by the clearly wise and skilled Strigani. Though nomadic strangers convinced their fellow sailors to round up the captain and all those loyal to him, imprisoning them in the brig. Then, of course, the crew had no choice but to drag out Schluter himself from the brig and cook the captain alive to replace the spoiled supplies. It was only fair, as he had dragged them out on this suicidal venture in the first place. So passed kindly Captain Schluter. Yet, as the Uternimung sailed on, the desperate crew felt the hunger in their bellies returning. So, they cooked and ate another of their fellows. And another. And another. Still, somehow, land hadn't come in sight for weeks, despite the navigational skills of the Strigani. Almost like the ship was cursed. none of the crew found themselves able to think straight, as the hunger seemed to only grow and grow, even as they consumed the flesh of their fellow men. Dark thoughts were whispered in their minds, and slowly but surely, the hunger led them all into madness. After some time, deep within the hold of the Untitled, an ancient coffin full of grave dirt stirred, and the lid slid off onto the floor. At long last, the Strigoi vampire within emerged, and walked up to the deck to reveal himself. Nosh was quite pleased to find his two Strigani servants had performed their role flawlessly, as every surviving member of the ship was now a ravening ghoul prepared to serve their new captain. Since that fateful day, the Untitled has been sighted sailing on seas of blood, launching nighttime raids on ships and coastal towns to drag screaming meat back to their vessel for future meals. Even the hardened pirates of Sartosa speak only in hushed whispers about the Untitled and her ghoul crew, lest they attract the attention of the cannibal abominations. That concludes the lore portion on Nosh. Hope you all enjoyed the tale of how this vampire pirate came about on the high seas. It's a rather short story, but a really thematic and interesting one in my opinion. Still, he's a full-on, authentic vampire pirate, so I consider that enough of a qualification to discuss. When it comes to acquiring him on campaign, I think the best way to lure out Captain Nanosh, one of those, to join your crew would be perhaps like once the player acquires 1000 infamy, he joins up, or there could be a quest revolving around tracking down and defeating his vessel in a sea battle so that he joins you. Anywho, moving on to what Nanosh would bring to close combat, I think I like that more, Nanosh. The main detail we know about him is that he's a Strigoi, so we're dealing with a rather bestial and monstrous captain, which would set him apart from the other vampire pirates. The big features that Strigoi tend to revolve around are things like regeneration and poison attacks, which should be the basic starting blocks for Nanosh. His stat line should be mainly focused on high health, solid melee attack, and high weapon strength. Perhaps to have him stand apart from his fellows further, for his melee weapons he could wield something like twin cutlasses or some variant of dual-wielding close combat weapons. When it comes to his spell selection, the Captain of Ghouls could maybe have the same selection of spells that the traditional Strigoi Vampire Lord has, but maybe with a little bit of flair from the Lore of the Deep. So essentially a mix of the Lore of the Deep and the Lore of Death, but maybe for his summon, instead of summoning zombie pirates, he summons special ghoul pirates or crypt horrors. That could be something fun and unique. Furthermore, I do think he should have a unique ability called something like the Hunger of the Untitled, or the Untilted's Hunger. That would be his really big deal. That would grant Nanosh a passive which would turn an enemy unit into a group of summoned ghouls once they reach super low health, like 5 to 10%. So essentially it would be like Morgur's Chaos Spawn passive, but instead of turning them into Chaos Spawn, he just turns them into a unit of ghouls, which isn't as powerful as Morgur's, but he's only a hero, and obviously you want Morgur to be the king of that. Honestly, if that's an ability he could bring to the table, it would be super powerful. So I don't think he would really need any other big battle gimmicks outside of just a respectable stat line and a little bit of magic. Because I just think that would be fun and fitting his storyline. He just walks up to a weak unit and it's like, hey, you're into cannibalism now. Join the party. On to weaknesses. The big one for Captain Nanosh is that, of course, being a do you like how I say that different every time I say it? Anyway, the big weakness for him would be, of course, that he's a Strigoi. So he comes packaged with the flammable debuff due to his regeneration. Of course, with the particular cocktail of features I've suggested for him, this vampire captain would have to carry a fairly hefty price in multiplayer to justify a rather nasty skill set if he had summoning spells on top of turning an enemy unit into a summon if they're at low enough health, on top of like regen and a bunch of other stuff. So he would probably be kind of expensive. Beyond that, Nanosh should probably be more lacking in the melee defense and armor department due to the legacy of his bloodline and to keep him reasonable. So if he gets focused down by damaging enemies in either close combat or at range, there's a reasonable chance of him getting very, very hurt and falling apart. You know, he's not probably a character you want to leave isolated, and he probably would not excel super well in duels against either monsters or very heavily armored enemies slash characters, because I don't see him probably having a ton of AP. But he might, I don't know. On the campaign map, Nanosh wouldn't need to use many abilities added to his design to make him an incredibly powerful take, in my opinion. Perhaps in addition to the usual buffs granted by vampire fleet captains, he could have a unique skill called Strigani Agents that grants a good 20 to 50% chance for all fleets faction-wide to gain +1 loyalty every turn. So it's not a guaranteed increase, but it would still be a powerful skill that helps mitigate the chance of poor loyalty from your captains a bit. Perhaps there could also be an unlockable skill called Ghoulish Crew, to which one would imagine are much more efficient and swift compared to typical zombies. So if you take this skill, it could reduce the cost of shipbuilding structures faction-wide, in addition to increase the campaign movement speed of the army Nanosh is a part of. Or maybe those buffs would be just for his army. So it makes, say, building cheaper, it makes campaign movement higher, and other various buffs to represent that your crew is being supplemented by much more skilled ghouls. I think he'd also be a good character for increasing casualty replenishment, scavenging, vampire corruption in his local province, and perhaps reduce recruitment costs for local and global pools, as he kind of like specializes in dealing with something, that kind of stuff. Or maybe reduce raise dead costs. Just something in that ballpark where having him around in your army provides just a lot of sustainable and enjoyable benefits. Finally, when it comes to his appearance, Captain Nanosh is a character with no official artwork or model, so basically he's free real estate. There are a number of forms that Strigoi vampires can take, especially those who are more in control of their faculties and thus not true ghoul kings. For Nanosh, he doesn't strike me as like an actual ghoul king like Vorag Bloodytooth was, in that he's not completely insane. He actually seems very calculating and in control of his mind, and is, doing interesting tactics and ploys to further his own ambitions. So I think for inspiration, he should take more from the sinister but very civilized form of Nashrak, who is a border prince lord that's actually a Strigoi vampire, but most people don't realize it. But instead of being a mysterious bestial lord of the border princes, he could of course have all that wonderful pirate flair in his outfit and weapon selection. Maybe a big hat with a big feather, who knows. While he could fight with just his claws, I do think him wielding some mix of pirate melee weapons like a cutlass and rapier or double cutlass would help him stand out from all the other Vampire Coast characters and help him have that flair of false civilized pretense to him instead of just, running around slashing people up. Anyway, that does it for the Heroes of Legend DLC proposal series. It's done! We're at the end! So now it's time for the really important questions. I would really appreciate y'all answering these questions down in the comment section below or messaging me on Twitter or whatever, but I would like feedback on this. First off, if Creative Assembly were to hypothetically release a Heroes of Legend pack that included 4 or 5 of the characters covered in all the videos of the series, would you buy it? How much do you think would be a fair price to pay for it? $5, $8, $10, $15? How much would you say, yes, that would be reasonable and I'd want to do that? If every race currently in the game were to gain a new legendary hero over the course of, say, 3 or 4 of these packs, with each pack having a handful of characters, would you find that really exciting, or would you think that's super irritating and nickel and diming? And finally, if you had the power to decide which characters showed up in which packs, how would you split them up? Would you be going for themes? Would you just release them in like a weird specific order? What do you think would be a fitting logic to put behind it? Please let me know. I would really appreciate to have your thoughts on that. So thanks again for joining my experiment here that ended up taking way longer than I thought it would, but I feel like that's actually the true title of my channel, or maybe the subtext. Welcome to my channel, where a nerd showcases his amazing ability to vastly underestimate the amount of time it takes to him to do literally anything. Anyway, I can see my stop up ahead, so while this has been very enjoyable, the time has sadly come for me to depart. Oh, no, my friends. I'm afraid your stop isn't for a very, very long time. You see, renting out a sailing vessel and resurrecting all of the fallen or lost folks we misplaced along the adventure was really expensive. So I agreed that you all would serve 100 years before the mast. Except for you living folks, y'all don't have to work. A vampire captain does, after all, need stock for himself and his ghoulish crew. Do say hello to Captain Nosh when you see him. On a more serious note, thank you all so much for joining me for this little experiment. I hope there was enough lore wrapped up in all of this that you didn't feel like it was just a colossal waste of time on just focusing on a game. But I tried to make it interesting, so I hope you all had fun with it, and we're off to other things in the future. I do want to give a big shout out and thank you to everyone who watched, of course, but especially to all of my patrons over on Patreon. Things have been cooking along lately, and I hope all you guys have felt justified in helping support my channel and keeping things alive and interesting around here. We do have some various projects coming up pretty soon that are nearing completion. And of course, I've been posting little snapshots of some stuff we've been working on in places that y'all hopefully have seen by now. And of course, I want to give a big shout out to the Big Seven. So thanks, very big thanks to Sign of the Emperor, Higgins the Seagull, Eric, Wendell Short Eyes, CJ Ubusta, Jeffrey Ramers, and Charles Bode for your very, very generous support of me and everything I do here. In any event, that's the end of this series. I'm not going to talk about it again for a really long time. We might move on to some new ones in the distant future, but there's some big things that need to be finished first. So thanks again, everyone, so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.